Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching this, it's safe to say you're looking for advice on how to set up a home studio, which is exactly what I'm going to cover in this video. This is really part 2 of a video I posted a while back that covered things to consider when setting up a home studio. You may want to click this link and check out that video first, as it lays the groundwork for today's discussion. I'll have a link in that video as well, which will send you back here. So let's get started. Now let's assume you've determined 2 things. First, what you plan to use your home studio for, and second, your budget for the software and gear you'll need to make it a reality. Here are a few keys to success that I'd like you to consider. First, be realistic. Buy and build what you need. For example, if you're only going to be recording yourself, then think about how many max inputs you'll need and build your studio around that. If you're recording bands in real time, then you're going to need a fair amount of inputs and outputs. If you have outboard gear like compressors, reverbs, and channel strips, then you'll need a fair amount as well. But for most home recording environments, usually a 2 input by 2 output or a 4 by 4 setup will be plenty, but you really should consider all the options. Point being, spend some time thinking about how you'll use your studio. If your needs change, and they probably will, you can always add on or upgrade. Next, you'll need to learn and understand your gear. You're buying some pretty cool technology, and just when you think you can't do something, you'll find out that you can after you dive into the manual. It's important to make a commitment to understanding all of the components of your studio rig. Now, to help with this, there's an amazing home studio community that's been growing for many years. You can check out the many Facebook groups and community forums and ask questions. You'll find that people are very willing to help. And of course, there are lots of videos here on YouTube that can help as well. Now, I agree that gear is very cool, but try not to get caught up in gear freeze. And what I mean by this is spending too much time trying to find the next greatest software or hardware gear. You're building a studio rig to allow you to create, so make creation priority 1. Now let's get into what you'll need to set up your home studio. Now I've boiled it down to 8 things you will need to set up your home studio, which we'll cover separately. And they are creativity, a studio space, a computer, a digital audio workstation or DAW or DAW, an audio interface, a microphone or multiple microphones, a MIDI controller, which is really optional, but most people will want a keyboard or drum pad, which falls into this category. And finally, headphones and or monitors for listening to your recordings and mixes. So first we'll cover each of these components, and then I'll show you how all this stuff fits together. Let's start with creativity. Now I have this as number 1 because it is the reason you're setting up your home studio. Altogether, these hardware and software components are like an artist's palette. Without creativity, it's just a bunch of hardware and software. Now on to number 2, which is your studio space, which is where the creativity happens. It's important to have a quiet room so you can isolate the elements you're recording and have a noise-free place for mixing. You'll want to be sure that you have enough space in the room to accommodate your studio desk and the artist you'll be recording. It's also a good idea to plan out where your gear will live on your desk. You'll want to have enough space for your current setup and some extra room to add gear as you grow. Now, you'll be spending a lot of time here, so you'll want to make sure you have a comfortable chair with good back support. And last but definitely not least, make sure you allocate time and money in your budget for acoustic treatment. You should really think of your studio space as an instrument, and the acoustics of this instrument will have a major effect on the quality of both your recordings and your mixes. When I set up my studio, I made a huge mistake skipping acoustic treatment, and my mixes paid the price. Now, I know it's not as exciting as the other stuff, but it is a critical step that is often overlooked. I have a few videos on my channel on acoustic treatment that you might want to check out. Now let's look at number 3, your computer. It's the core of your studio rig, which is why I'll spend a good amount of time on it. It's also a very complex device, so we're just going to cover the basics. So why is it the core of your studio? Because it connects to your audio interface and runs the software you'll use to record and mix. It also connects to digital instruments like keyboards and drum pads. You can use either Mac or PC. You can even use tablets and smartphones, although these devices will have limitations due to their processing power and memory. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're focusing on a studio built around a Mac or a PC. Now, if you already have a computer, it may be fine, but you'll need to consider a few things. Now, one computer adage that holds true in digital recording is the more CPU power and memory you have, the better. By memory, I mean random access memory, but having a fast disk drive is also important. Now, these 3 things together have an effect on latency during recording, as well as how many tracks you can effectively record and mix. Now, latency is a consideration when you're overdubbing tracks. If your playback is delayed, then your recordings are going to be out of sync. And your audio interface is also a factor with latency, but more on that later. So as an example, if you're going to record a maximum of 4 tracks at a time and end up with about 30 tracks in total for your song to mix, you can probably get away with an average computer configuration. But let's say you're recording 16 tracks simultaneously and you want to be able to mix a total of 150 plus tracks in your song, well, you're going to need a much more powerful system to support that. But usually a reasonably powered late model computer with 8 gig of RAM is plenty of power to support the average home studio that I referred to in the first example. It's important to check system requirements for the software and hardware you're considering, but often these are minimum requirements. Now, when you're recording and mixing, you'll have a lot of information on the screen, so the more monitor space you have, the better. I also suggest a computer with USB 2.0 or 3.0 ports. Thunderbolt interfaces are fine too, but the compatible audio interfaces tend to be on the expensive side. USB 3.0 is plenty fast. But I really don't want to get into a debate about which connection standard is best. Personally, I use a USB 3 audio interface, but there are plenty of USB 2 interfaces out there that will get the job done nicely. Again, please keep in mind that we're just scratching the surface of how computers are used for digital recording. The bottom line is spend time thinking about and researching which computer will work best in your setup. You don't want to end up with those nasty pops and clicks that are usually caused by an underpowered computer. And now for the fun stuff. Number 4, your DAW. Your DAW or DAW or digital audio workstation is the software core of your studio rig. Its function is to record and mix audio data from either your audio interface or external files. There are many DAWs to choose from, and they range from entry-level apps to professional, full-featured software systems. Of course, as with anything, the more you spend, the more capability you'll get. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to spend a lot of money to get started. In fact, most DAWs have free versions to get you started. Now, generally, these free versions will have feature limitations, but most software companies will offer an upgrade path to go from freemium to premium. Most DAWs come with built-in plugins, which are software apps used to do things like compression and equalization. And there are literally hundreds of third-party plugins or VSTs that are available as add-ons to most DAWs, but that's really a subject in itself. Also, many audio interfaces and MIDI controllers have freemium DAW versions included. But remember, you get what you pay for, and usually freemium is free because it's limited. It's important to spend some time researching the feature set of each DAW. You want to think about how you will use a DAW and what capabilities you will need to produce the results you're after. Personally, I use multiple DAWs, but I have a preference which I use most of the time. From the video content on my channel, you can probably guess which one. Studio One. But the point is, I started with its freemium version and grew into the pro version. My advice is to choose one DAW and commit to learning it inside and out. Now let's talk about your DAW's hardware partner, number 5, the audio interface. This is the device that turns analog signals, like signal coming from your guitar or microphone, into digital data that can be stored and processed in your DAW. When you start looking at audio interfaces, you'll find many options ranging from crappy to awesome. But what it really comes down to is the quality of the electronics and the number of inputs and outputs it can handle, as well as the type of inputs. It's important to buy an interface with quality preamps, since what you're recording will generally be processed by them. You'll also want to figure out how many mic and instruments you'll be recording simultaneously, as this will determine how many input channels you'll need on your interface. You'll also need to think about the type of gear you'll be connecting to it. Most will have mic and instrument type inputs, but if you need to connect any gear that sends line level signals like an external channel strip, you'll need to choose an interface that has a compatible input. You can check the specs of the inputs and outputs on the audio interface and the gear you're connecting to determine the compatibility. Now, as I mentioned before, most interfaces include freemium DAW versions, so keep that in mind. And some have very cool virtual mixers that allow you to process input signals and control input and output routing. Now, this won't always take away the need for a hardware mixer, but virtual mixers give you a ton of connection flexibility in the box, so to speak. Now, there are a ton of different ways to configure what connects to your audio interface, so it's very important to spend time thinking about it. My suggestion is to go with a USB-compatible interface. It's a universal standard that's supported on nearly every computer that was built in the last 5 years. Now, I remember being asked by a subscriber if I had the choice between a so-so interface that cost $150 and a great interface that cost $300, which one would I go with? Well, I would bite the bullet and get the better one. A very wise man once told me, select, don't settle. and that holds true with studio gear. So spend some time researching it and decide what's best for your requirements. The last thing I'll mention is if you're going to use a condenser microphone, you'll want to buy an audio interface that can provide 48-volt phantom power on its inputs, which leads us to the fun topic of number 6, microphones. Now, mics come in many shapes, sizes, and types, but for our discussion, we're going to focus on 2 types, dynamic and condenser. And again, this is a general discussion. There's plenty of stuff on the web about the subject of microphones. Now, dynamic mics like the Shure SM58 shown here have a simple design, don't require a power supply, and are usually inexpensive. Dynamics are usually the mics you see used in a PA system, but they can also be used in a studio to record amplifiers, drums, or even vocals. In fact, I'm using a dynamic mic right now to record my voice for this video. Now, the frequency range sensitivity of a dynamic mic tends to be limited compared to a condenser mic. Condenser mics are a bit more complicated in design and require external power source, usually 48-volt phantom power, and will usually be more expensive. Condenser mics will also generally have a higher sensitivity at all frequencies, which means it'll pick up more sound in a clearer fashion. Condensers are usually the best choice for vocals, acoustic instruments, or mics set up to capture room sounds. Now, it would be optimal to have one of each type of microphone, but if you have a budget constraint, choose the mic type that best fits your application. If I had to choose one microphone type, I would probably choose a condenser because the applications are wider. A word of advice though, don't buy a crappy mic. Chances are you won't be happy with the recording results and you'll end up just wasting your money. Also, invest in a pop filter. They don't cost a lot of money and they can save you a lot of headaches by removing vocal pops from your recordings. Now let's look at number 7, MIDI controllers. There are a broad range of MIDI-compatible controllers you can connect to your computer for music creation and control. If you're not familiar with MIDI, it's a standard that allows digital devices to communicate notes with each other. Google it if you want to learn more. Probably the most common MIDI controller is a keyboard, which allows you to send MIDI notes to your DAW to play virtual instruments. This is a subject we could spend hours on, but let's just summarize. Think about how you will use the controller you're considering, learn about it, and buy a good one. Cheap crap breaks and may not function well. Stick with proven stuff. You can also try before you buy at your local music store. Now, generally these devices connect via USB, and many of them include freemium DAW versions. They also include synths and sound software, so be sure to look at that as well. And on to number 8, monitoring, which of course pertains to both monitors and headphones, both of which are connections to your ears. First, let's look at monitors, sometimes referred to as near-field monitors, which are designed for close listening in a studio environment. There are 2 types of monitors, active and passive. Active being powered by an internal amplifier, and passive needing power from an external amp. The speakers on your stereo system are usually passive. Home studio monitors are usually active, like the ones pictured. With monitors, you have many choices in speaker sizes and tuning features. The goal is to have good frequency definition and flat response so you can hear the flaws. Larger monitors will have higher definition and wider frequency reproduction. Monitors will sound slightly different in every studio, and as I mentioned before, it's very important to acoustically treat your space. Now, it's a plus if your monitors offer the ability to be acoustically tuned. This allows you to set them up just for your room. And keep in mind that smaller speakers on your monitor will produce less sound in the lower bass tone frequencies. When it comes to your studio monitors, it's very important to do your homework and buy quality products. And it's equally important to place your monitors in an acoustically treated room that allows you to hear and mix the tones that are really there. Lastly, even though you need 2, active studio monitors are sometimes sold separately, so you'll need to purchase 2 to complete your pair. Now, headphones are the other monitoring option. In fact, you may choose to start by purchasing a good set of headphones as your monitoring source. Since you're likely to be wearing them for hours at a time, comfort should be a consideration. Also, consumer headphones and earbuds are not a good choice because they may not allow you to hear the flaws when mixing. For studio use, you'll want to choose headphones with wide frequency range, flat response, and good clarity so that you can hear the music in its true form. You may want to test drive headphones using both raw and mixed examples so you can get a good idea of how they will sound. Again, don't buy cheap headphones for your studio. You'll just be throwing money away. It's optimal to have both monitors and headphones available to you for listening, but let's talk for a moment about using just headphones for mixing. Honestly, you'll find arguments on both sides for mixing with headphones versus monitors, so I won't debate that subject. What I will say is that if you can't buy both, then go with a good set of headphones. You'll need them for the recording phase, and you can use them to mix. You'll probably want to test reference your mixes on other speakers like your stereo or in your car, but you're going to do that anyway, right? I've been using the headphones pictured here for a number of years. They're comfortable, and they're known for their relatively flat response. So how do all these components connect? Let's take a look. This is a very simplified example, but it does show where each of the components we spoke about fits. And if you take the time to learn about each of these areas, you'll be able to set up a great home studio on your own. It may seem a bit overwhelming now, but it really isn't. Most of today's software and gear follow a plug-and-play philosophy. So by understanding the information I presented in this video, you'll have a great foundation to build on. But of course, the one thing missing from this picture is creativity, which can only come from you or the artist you're recording and mixing. Thanks for watching, and I hope this information was helpful. Please don't hesitate to post questions in the comments below or email me at the address listed here. If you like what you saw, please take a second to click the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your home studio.